The rotor blades of two Black Hawk helicopters didn't just cut through the air, they roared, shaking the Oak Creek General parking lot. ICU windows rattled, dust swirled, alarms screamed. Security guards dropped to the ground, hands on weapons, convinced the hospital was under attack. But this wasn't a threat. It was a call for a hero, a rescue mission. And the target wasn't a diplomat, a celebrity, or a high-ranking officer. It was Nina, walking slowly to her beaten-up sedan, a cardboard box cradled in her arms, her scrubs stained with exhaustion, tears still drying on her cheeks. She had been fired, terminated, dismissed in front of her colleagues, humiliated for reasons that didn't make sense. Every whisper, every glance behind her back had branded her incompetent. Today, her life felt like it had been erased in one cold announcement. Then the sky tore open. The Black Hawks descended with precision, emergency lights flashing, their rotors whipping clouds of dust and debris across the lot. Staff froze, doctors stumbled, patients clutched their beds, and in that chaos, Nina looked up, disbelief mixing with the faintest spark of hope. The same people who had turned her away, the hospital administrators, the senior staff, were on the asphalt, mouths agape, eyes wide, some even falling to their knees, begging her silently. The woman they had dismissed, the nurse they thought replaceable, was now the only person capable of saving lives that day. And in that moment, Nina realized something she had never fully understood. The world often doesn't see your value until it comes crashing down from above. Nina's knees were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of everything that had just happened. She set the cardboard box carefully on the asphalt, dust settling around it like a thin curtain of forgotten moments. Her heart still raced from the roar of the rotors, the chaos, and the impossible scene that had just unfolded. For a brief moment, she simply allowed herself to stand still, breathing in the realization that the world she had walked out of had just begged her to return. Around her, the hospital staff and administrators were frozen in disbelief, eyes wide, hands gripping each other for support. Some were still on the ground, faces pressed into the pavement, as though they could make themselves smaller, in the presence of someone they had dismissed. Others clutched their phones, perhaps to call for reinforcements, perhaps to capture the surreal sight for proof that this was real. Every gaze was fixed on her, on the woman they had undervalued, the nurse they thought replaceable. Nina didn't respond immediately. She stood silent, letting the moment stretch. She had learned long ago that true power didn't announce itself with words, it revealed itself through calm presence and action. The murmurs of apology, the frantic gestures, the desperate pleas, they all circled her like a storm she had somehow walked into, yet remained untouched. Her mind flashed back to the morning, the bitter announcement that had ended her career at Oak Creek General. She remembered the looks, the snide comments, the whispers of, maybe she isn't cut out for this. She had swallowed it all, packing up her few personal belongings, her badge heavy in her hand, a reminder that while they could take her job, they couldn't take her experience, her knowledge, or her commitment to saving lives. Now, with helicopters hovering overhead and staff staring at her in awe, Nina realized something. This was her moment, not of revenge, not of retribution, but of undeniable validation. The world could try to write her off, ignore her contributions, and underestimate her. But in crises, the truth always revealed itself. And the truth was simple: she was indispensable. She moved deliberately, each step measured, confident. The administrators scrambled to their feet, shuffling papers, whispering urgent instructions, but all eyes remained on her. Nurses, doctors, and emergency responders glanced at one another, unsure whether to proceed without her guidance. She had been absent for less than an hour, yet, in her absence, the chaos had become a mirror of her impact. She had always been the anchor, the calm in the storm, and now it was glaringly obvious. The dust stirred by the rotors settled slowly, revealing the first patients being wheeled toward the helicopters. Emergency responders exchanged hurried instructions, but without her, their confidence faltered. Nina stepped forward, finally breaking the silence with a clear, authoritative voice. "We move now," she commanded, simple, firm, without hesitation. The chaos seemed to respond to her presence alone. The staff straightened, actions coordinated, a rhythm returning to the madness. Every movement she made was deliberate. She checked equipment, ensured stretchers were secured, and confirmed that each patient was ready for transport. Her colleagues watched, some still in shock, others finally beginning to understand the depth of the mistake they had made. The nurse they had dismissed was now orchestrating life-saving operations with calm precision, saving the very people they were responsible for protecting. And in that moment, Nina allowed herself a small, private smile. It wasn't triumph in the way the world might define it. She didn't gloat or demand recognition. She simply felt the quiet satisfaction of being seen, not for the first time, but for the first time in a way that truly mattered. The world had underestimated her. They had doubted her abilities. They had dismissed her. And yet here she was, silent, composed, and irreplaceable. As the first helicopter lifted off, Nina watched it disappear into the stormy sky, carrying patients to safety. The rotor's echo faded, leaving only the heavy silence of realization behind. Everyone who had doubted her now understood without words that she had always been the backbone of Oak Creek General. And she, standing there with her badge in her hand, knew that sometimes the world doesn't acknowledge your worth until it literally comes crashing down from above, and by then, it's too late to replace it. The chaos in the Oak Creek General parking lot had not yet settled. Dust still swirled in tight little cyclones kicked up by the helicopter's rotors. Emergency lights flashed in uneven patterns, casting sharp shadows across the asphalt, illuminating faces etched with disbelief. And through it all, Nina moved with an almost magnetic authority, her footsteps measured, deliberate, as if the chaos itself knew to make way for her. Her hands tightened around her badge, for a fraction of a second, a talisman that had survived the betrayal of colleagues, the sting of humiliation, and the weight of dismissal. It wasn't just a piece of metal, it was proof that she belonged in this world of emergency and life-or-death decisions. And now, with the helicopters descending like giants from the stormy sky, it was the only thing anchoring her in a sea of chaos. "Check the patients on stretcher 3, she barked, her voice cutting through the din. Emergency responders, still reeling from the absurdity of what was happening, snapped to attention. Stretchers were wheeled into position with a precision they didn't think they had, until Nina's steady presence guided them. Doctors who had once doubted her judgment now hesitated only briefly before following her lead, their pride swallowed by the immediacy of the moment. Around her, the administrators who had fired her were scrambling desperately. Papers flew, phones were pressed to ears, urgent messages barked into phones, yet all of it was meaningless without her. Some of them tried to issue commands, only to be overridden by Nina's calm decisiveness. She didn't yell, she didn't argue, she simply moved, and the world moved with her. One nurse, barely able to steady herself, whispered to a colleague, She's in charge. She always should have been in charge." The words were barely audible over the rotors, but Nina caught them. She allowed herself the tiniest flicker of a smile, not for pride, but for vindication. Every moment of doubt, every sideways glance, every whisper behind her back had led to this, a silent demonstration of her competence, undeniable and uncompromising. The first helicopter's doors swung open. Emergency responders coordinated with her seamlessly now, following the rhythm she had set. Patients were secured, 4S checked, monitors double-checked. Every movement calculated, every life accounted for. And through it all, Nina remained calm, a pillar of authority in the eye of a literal storm. A junior doctor approached, stammering, "Nina, should we?" She gave him a look that needed no words. A single nod, measured and controlled, was enough. He immediately understood. The hesitation vanished. Action replaced doubt. Nina had the ability to strip fear from people simply by standing in the right place, at the right time, with unwavering focus. The administrators watched, helpless, as the woman they had dismissed orchestrated a rescue with precision, competence, and grace. Their disbelief had turned into a palpable sense of shame, and yet even shame couldn't disguise the awe. They had underestimated her for years, and now, the truth was undeniable. Nina wasn't just a nurse, she was the backbone of Oak Creek General, the quiet force that had prevented disaster when no one else knew what to do. Minutes stretched like hours. The second helicopter landed, rotors whipping the remaining dust into a frenzy. Patients were loaded, equipment checked, staff moved with newfound coordination inspired by Nina's example. One of the administrators whispered to another, We shouldn't have let her go." No argument, no debate, just a raw acknowledgement of the truth they had refused to see until now. And through it all, Nina remained silent. Her badge glinted in the emergency lights, a symbol of authority earned not through title but through competence, courage, and perseverance. She didn't speak for recognition. She didn't need to. Every action she took, every decision she made was proof of her worth, louder than any words could ever be. By the time the helicopters lifted off again, the parking lot had transformed from chaos to a meticulously coordinated scene of rescue. Patients were safe, staff were in awe, and administrators were humbled. Nina stood at the center, calm, composed, silent, but victorious. She had walked out humiliated, carrying nothing but her box and her badge, yet she had returned in the most undeniable way possible, by saving lives, commanding respect, and proving that competence could never be erased by paper or whispers. As the last helicopter disappeared into the stormy sky, the wind still carrying the echoes of rotors, Nina finally allowed herself to exhale. Her heart still raced, adrenaline still thrumming, but there was a quiet satisfaction in her chest. She had survived the dismissal, navigated the chaos, and emerged not just recognized but essential. And for the first time in months, she realized she didn't need validation from anyone else. Her actions had spoken louder than the world's doubt, and in that truth, she found peace. The stormy sky rumbled, and the wind from the helicopters whipped dust and debris across the parking lot. Nina's calm presence contrasted sharply with the chaos around her. Staff and administrators still lingered, eyes wide, mouths open, unable to comprehend how the woman they had dismissed was orchestrating everything flawlessly. She didn't shout, she didn't panic, she simply moved, a silent conductor commanding the orchestra of chaos. "Patient 7, secure the 4 and prep for lift," she instructed, her voice cutting through the rotors like a blade. Orders were followed immediately. Junior nurses and doctors moved with newfound precision, guided by the quiet authority she exuded. Every gesture, every glance, every word was calculated, focused, and unshakable. She had become the eye of the storm. One administrator tried to interject, fumbling over papers. "Nina, She didn't look at him. A single sharp gesture silenced him instantly. "We don't have time. Follow my lead," she said, her tone firm but calm. The man froze, realizing that authority here wasn't dictated by a title or position. It was earned through action, experience, and the courage to stay composed when everything else was collapsing. The helicopter's doors swung open again, emergency lights reflecting off the dust and sweat-streaked asphalt. Patients were guided to the aircraft, their stretchers moving in precise lines. Nurses and responders followed Nina's lead, catching every mistake before it could happen, anticipating every hazard. Her colleagues who had doubted her competence now looked on in awe, some whispering apologies they could never voice aloud. Nina's eyes scanned the scene. She spotted a young nurse, trembling as she tried to secure a patient. "You've got this," Nina said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. The girl's eyes widened, confidence replacing fear. In that small moment, Nina reminded everyone that leadership wasn't about barking orders. It was about inspiring trust, even in the face of impossible odds. The second helicopter lifted off, carrying the last of the patients to safety. Dust swirled around Nina's feet as the rotor's echoes faded. She exhaled, but only for a moment. There was still work to do. The chaos had not entirely ended. Equipment needed checking, patients required stabilization, and the staff needed guidance to ensure no mistakes were made in the aftermath of the storm. As she moved through the lot, the hospital administrators followed at a cautious distance. Some avoided her gaze. Others could barely contain their shock. They had underestimated her for years, ignored her warnings, doubted her decisions, and now, in the most public and undeniable way possible, they were witnessing the truth. Nina was the backbone of Oak Creek General. Without her, the rescue could have failed. With her, it had succeeded flawlessly. For the first time, Nina allowed herself a moment of clarity. She had been fired, humiliated, and dismissed, yet here she was, still standing, still commanding, still irreplaceable. The helicopters might leave, the dust might settle, and the storm might pass, but the mark she had left on this day, on these people, and on herself, would never be erased. In that charged, electric moment, the hospital understood something vital. the world often doesn't see your worth until it literally comes crashing down from above. And when it does, there is no mistaking the one who truly matters. The last helicopter lifted off, rotors slicing the air as if marking the end of a storm that had been brewing for years. Dust still hung thick in the Oak Creek General parking lot, swirling around the exhausted, stunned staff. Emergency lights flickered across faces etched with shock and awe. And there, in the center of it all, stood Nina. Silent, composed, almost unreal in her calm authority. She didn't shout. She didn't demand praise. She simply watched as the chaos she had tamed slowly began to settle. Patients were accounted for. Equipment checked. Junior staff now moved with precision, confidence replacing fear. Every action, every decision had flowed from her without a single misstep. The nurse they had fired, humiliated, and doubted had orchestrated a rescue that left no room for error. Administrators and senior staff approached hesitantly. Some avoided her gaze, ashamed of their earlier dismissal. Others hesitated, unsure if they should kneel, apologize, or simply stand in silence. They had underestimated her for too long. Now there was no denying it. Nina was the backbone of this hospital, the silent hero who had turned panic into order, chaos into life-saving precision. A young nurse, still trembling, stepped forward. I didn't think we could do it, she admitted, voice barely above the wind. Nina's eyes softened, just for a moment. You did it, she said simply. You all did. You just needed someone to guide you. The humility in her voice contrasted with the undeniable authority in her presence, reminding everyone that leadership wasn't about ego, it was about trust, courage, and the quiet power to act when it mattered most. The storm clouds in the sky began to break, streaks of sunlight cutting through the gray haze. The rotor's echoes faded into memory, leaving a strange, almost sacred silence over the parking lot. Staff and administrators looked at each other, realizing the gravity of what had just occurred. They had almost lost their most capable nurse, not to a rival hospital, not to retirement, but to the arrogance of underestimation. And now, they understood in no uncertain terms that Nina was irreplaceable. She finally bent down and picked up her cardboard box, dusting off the remnants of debris that clung to it. For a moment, she allowed herself a private, small smile, a quiet acknowledgement of what she had endured. The humiliation, the whispers, the dismissal, it had all led to this moment of undeniable truth. She had walked out with nothing but her badge and dignity, and returned in a way that no one could ignore or forget. One of the administrators finally found his voice. Nina, we need you back, he stammered, eyes wide. There was no room for ego in his words, only desperation and recognition. Nina didn't need to respond immediately. The scene itself said everything. She had always been needed, always been capable, always been the one holding everything together. As she walked toward the hospital doors, her staff following without a word, it wasn't a triumphant march, it was quiet, controlled, full of authority earned through action, not titles. Every eye was on her. Every heart silently acknowledged her worth. And for the first time in a long time, Nina felt what it truly meant to be seen, not just as a nurse, but as a force no one could replace. Sometimes the world doesn't see your value until it comes crashing down from above, and when it does, there is no mistaking the one who matters most. The dust had finally settled. Oak Creek General's parking lot, once a battlefield of chaos and disbelief, now felt eerily quiet. The helicopters were gone, their rotors' roar replaced by the distant hum of ambulances and emergency lights that still flickered in the fading storm. Staff moved cautiously, almost reverently around Nina, their expressions a mixture of awe, relief, and lingering guilt. She stood alone for a moment, badge glinting in the dim, storm-streaked sunlight, her cardboard box in hand. The weight of the day pressed on her shoulders, but unlike before, it was not a burden. It was a reminder. A reminder of what she had endured, what she had survived, and what she had proven. She had been fired, dismissed, humiliated. And yet, here she was, the anchor in a storm that no one else could control. A young doctor approached cautiously, words hesitant but sincere. Nina, I want to say, I'm sorry, we didn't see what you were worth. Nina shook her head gently, her voice calm but firm. It's not about apologies, she said. It's about what you do when it matters. Actions speak louder than words, and today we all saw the truth. The administrators remained, silent, humbled, unable to meet her gaze fully. They had been wrong to underestimate her, wrong to assume she could be replaced, wrong to doubt her abilities. And now, they had no choice but to confront that truth. They had witnessed firsthand that her courage, composure, and dedication were not optional. They were essential. Nina finally set the box down, taking a deep breath. The storm had passed, but the lesson lingered in the air, heavy yet undeniable. She had walked out with nothing but dignity, and returned not with anger or vengeance, but with competence, calm, and authority. The world had doubted her, humiliated her, and turned its back, but she had endured. She had proven that true value isn't always recognized immediately, and sometimes it takes chaos, urgency, and life-or-death stakes to make people realize what they've lost. One of the junior nurses, voice barely a whisper, said, "We'll never forget this." Nina smiled faintly. It wasn't the recognition she sought, but the acknowledgement was enough to know that her presence mattered, that her dedication could not be ignored, and that she had left an indelible mark on everyone who had doubted her. As she walked toward the hospital doors, staff naturally parted to make way for her. There was no fanfare, no applause, just quiet respect. And in that silence, Nina understood something profound. The world might not always see your worth. It might doubt you, dismiss you, or even try to erase you. But when it matters most, when lives hang in the balance, the truth always reveals itself. And so she stepped inside, her badge still shining, her head held high. The chaos of the day behind her, the storm now a memory, she carried forward the quiet power of someone who had been tested and had emerged unshakable. A lesson for her colleagues, for the administrators, and for anyone who had ever doubted her. Real strength, real value, and real heroism cannot be hidden forever. Sometimes the world doesn't see your worth until it literally comes crashing down from above. And when it does, there is no mistaking who truly matters. As Nina walked through the hospital doors, leaving the chaos and dust behind, one thing was clear. Some heroes don't need applause, and some victories speak louder in silence. But now, it's your turn to witness the courage, the determination, and the unshakable strength that turned doubt into awe. If this story left you stunned, inspired, or just plain speechless, make sure you hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss a story of silent heroism, shocking twists, and life-changing moments. Every story we share is about the unseen, the underestimated, and the underdogs who rise when the world least expects it. Don't just watch, be part of the journey. And remember, sometimes the world doesn't see your worth until it comes crashing from above. Will you recognize the heroes in your life before it's too late?